Alright guys, welcome back to another episode of Bulletproof Mindset, Scotland's #1 health, fitness and entertainment podcast. Today we're talking about fitness myths. Is there any merit to them, or are they just straight up lies that we've been missold in the fitness space? The three myths that we are covering today is: does lifting weights stunt your growth? Is fasted cardio better for burning body fat than fed cardio? And is there such thing as the anabolic window, which essentially meant if you don't consume protein 30 to 60 minutes after your workout, then it's a complete waste of time. Now, weirdly enough, there's some merit to some of these, but I hope you enjoy today's episode, enjoy the deep dive into them. And this is going to be a running theme over the next couple of months. Every so often, I'll do a fitness myth-busting episode. So if you've got any fitness questions that you want to be answered on the show, then send me a message on Instagram at Coach Crossar or at Bulletproof Mindset __. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I did mention that there's going to be new lifting club workshops running on a Sunday. So if you have a kid and you want to get them involved with lifting weights, then check out that part of the episode. There's going to be a link below. Fill that out and I would be happy to host you. So with that being said, enjoy today's episode. Missing once is fine. We are all human beings after all. But missing twice is the start of a new habit. And that's something I want you to remember. There's the whole saying of don't miss twice, and it's kind of been branded in the coaching world. But there is some merit to it. Like, we all have fuck-ups. We all have things that go wrong, and we can sort of chalk up to whatever excuse that it may be. But what you can do is draw a line in the sand and make sure that you do everything in your power to move in to the next day with momentum and ensuring breaking the cycle of where that mishap may turn into a habit. I've saw this with myself when I was a wee bit more relaxed. And I don't want to say more relaxed, but I just had more sweets and chocolate in and around Christmas time. And I say that Christmas Christmas ain't so far away at all, is it? We are moving into the month of September very, very soon. And that's September, October, November, December, 4 months, and we're going to be singing Christmas carols. Anyway, the story I want to tell you is I remember at Christmas, more sweets around the house, and I started nibbling at them. And after a couple of times of reaching for them, I found that it was a habit that after I ate a meal, reaching for a bit of chocolate when there was no chocolate in the house, I instilled that habit in me. And that's where I could have easily lost control with the foods, and ultimately it's a habit that I had picked up. Not a bad habit, because I don't think good or bad habits inherently exist. It's just it wasn't the right habit to have with the goal that I had. So anyway, what we're talking about today, you'll gather from the title of today's episode that we're Myth-Busting Mondays is going to be the theme. I'm not going to do this every Monday because I still want to sort of chop up and go after some of the topics that I'm diving into myself. Spoke over the last couple of weeks about Ozempic. That will be next Monday's episode. I think I was planning on releasing it this Monday, but there's a ton of stuff that I ended up diving deeper into when it came to the research and hearing other people's opinions and so on and so forth. So Myth-Busting Monday, this was going to be a one-off episode, but when I cruised the Tinterweb, I ended up writing down like 16 different points, and I was like, fuck, there's a lot of shit out there. So I'm going to go over 3 today, and I'll drip feed them out over the next couple of months and so forth. But what I want to ask you guys, before I even get into this, is there something out there that you want me to dive into on the show and debate? Is it a myth, or is there some merit to it? So if you've got something to say, head over to my Instagram at Coach Crossar or the podcast page at Bulletproof Mindset __, and send me a little DM. Send me what's on your mind. What is a myth that you believe could be true, but maybe needs busted? And we can cover it in one of the future episodes. Where are we starting with this? So the 3 myths that I've picked for today, the first one up is, does lifting weights stunt growth? And this came off the back of a conversation I had with a good friend, Big Mikey. His episode is going to be released later this week. This man is 6'7", and his son, Ragnar, is about, I think he's 7 years old, I want to say. And when we were talking about his son showing this, because his dad's lifting weights, his son really wants to lift weights, but he's not too sure because of the whole lifting weights can stunt growth side of things. And when I said to him, I was like, oh, you do know that's a myth. Even for him, he was like, oh, is it? I wasn't sure if there was some merit to it. Because when you break the logic down here, heavy weights, there is a compression component against it. And you could easily draw a conclusion that if you lift weights, then as you're growing, that compression is going to stunt your growth. But it's actually a load of bullshit. It's a load of BS. There is no scientific data that we have through any papers researched that supports that resistance training actually inherits or stunts the growth of kids. In fact, all the scientific literature that we have against anything that's been done, that's been published on kids' resistance training, actually show the opposite, that it does more for them from a injury prevention, bone density, muscle coordination, confidence, all the things that we can reap as adults as we lift weights, you can also get them, if not more, when you're younger, which is quite crazy. Now, I wanted to kind of understand, where did this myth come from? And scoured the web and whatnot, and I could only find two pieces of information that which were done on other YouTube videos. I'll link them below. The first one was from Jeff Nippard's video, and it's so funny when you actually dive into like this research team who kind of popularised this myth, I guess if you say. The consensus was that, again, logically speaking, if it made sense, then it became true. And that's as simple as where any myth or rumour comes from. So in 1964, a team of researchers were out in Japan and noticed that these kids were performing heavy laborious jobs. So this was like farming, like a bit of construction, a bit of fucking slave labour type of work. And they also drew the conclusion that because they were such resistance-heavy tasks, there was pressure put on these kids which inherently stopped them growing and affected what we call your growth plates. And that conclusion was drawn just because it kind of made sense. Like, resistance or heavy load compressed on a young kid as they're growing would make sense that they don't grow into their average height of whatever their genetic potential could have been. Now, what was massively overlooked was that in the 1964s, these kids that were performing these strenuous tasks were that they were, first of all, malnourished and potentially overworked. Like, what 6, 7, 8-year-old do you see in today's world that are working on farms and construction and doing these laborious, heavy activities? So that one was eventually debunked. But what did popularise that was this team of researchers that kind of, I would imagine how media is, especially today, but back then, publishing papers, publishing articles, and it just became a myth. And there was a whole scaremongering side of things as well. And this kind of secondly ties into where this myth came from, that there was let's make sure I get this right, the National Electronic Injury Surveillance System, which basically was created in the 70s and 80s to monitor injuries across a multitude of different things that can happen, from sport to just any activity. They created a bit of a scaremongering because there was two extreme incidents that happened with two kids dying in I believe it was the late 70s into the 80s from bench pressing. And this was one under, I think one was 9 years old and the other one was 12, I believe. And sadly, these kids had died because there was too much load and couldn't get the barbell off their chest. And the second kid, again, I think the second kid ended up having a heart attack because of the compression of the bar. I don't know how heavy it was that it was loaded, that the information didn't say. But sadly, two kids had passed away. And those two kids that passed away kind of had this uproar of, right, we need to kind of have safer environments for our kids, which is rightly so. Now, weirdly enough, it doesn't go on, the onus never went on their parents, or I don't know which environment these kids were in. I don't know if they managed to get into a gym, albeit gyms weren't as popular as they are today. But this then funded a biased view to try and push kids away from lifting weights because it was deemed as unsafe. And look, in fairness, any injury that happens to kids under the age of 12, in fact, I would go as far as say under the age of 16, that if kids are lifting weights with a personal trainer or a coach overseeing them, I would say, if not all times, the responsibility is on that coach, and it's the coach's responsibility to make sure that the kid is doing it under load management and in a safe environment from a technique standpoint. This is, again, for personal trainers. I would say 9 times out of 10, if your client's got an injury, it's because we've fucked up as a personal trainer. We've maybe pushed them a bit too hard, or we've not paid attention to the signs, or how active they've been throughout that week, how mobile they are. Like, there's so many different reasons. So interestingly enough, the combination of this research team, just before the 1970s, there was already a bias from that, a bit of data out there, and then this just kind of funded everything else. But thankfully, since then, we have had numerous articles and scientific literature posted that this is not true whatsoever. In fact, kids these days are more likely to stunt their growth playing a sporting activity than they are resistance training. And the whole argument was around injuring the growth plates that we have at whatever part of our body, our arms, our knees, our legs, our femurs, whatever. But the idea that if there's resistance pressing and compressing that area of the body, then that would stunt the growth of these growth plates, which isn't the case whatsoever. The only way we can stunt our growth is if there's fractures done to those areas of the body. So if you look at your elbow joint, for example, and if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see here, there would be a growth plate at the bottom part of my elbow and then the top of my elbow. And in those parts, as I'm growing up as a young kid, that's where there is a generational or a genetic potential of how long my forearm becomes and how long my humerus, like where your bicep and tricep sits on. Only way I would damage or stunt the growth in that part of my body would be if there was a fracture on that joint. And fractures, I'm not saying they don't happen with resistance training, but it's very unlikely for that to happen with resistance training, especially for kids, because kids, there's a reason why they don't have open gym memberships. It's always done with a coach or someone leading the class or whatever it is. And that's why it's super important that they do with the right amount of load, they do it with the right amount of technique, and they have the right amount of integrity, not just to get the kids sweating because that's the right thing to do. Now, another wee bit of foreshadowing here, in a future episode, sweating is also a myth that you're burning more calories. So we'll come on to that in the future. So now we understand where this myth came from. What is the fear mongering around it? So parents and any parent, I would imagine, the last thing you want is your kid not reaching their full potential. So you hear this information, and let's be honest, any information can be taken out of context. There is people on this earth that still believe that the earth is flat. And if you listen to this podcast and you believe that, then man, I'm open to hearing your arguments, but we have so much information to highlight that it isn't flat, right? And like this, the bias of information that's out there can then inherently judge what we want, because at the end of the day, parents want one thing for their kids, and it's them to be safe. It's them not to hurt themselves or have any sort of setbacks in life. So straight away, there's a bias and an emotional response not to let kids lift weights. But in reality, the amount of scientific literature, as I said, that has been published out there, one of the best things we can do for our kids is get them introduced to resistance training. The earlier we do this, the stronger our kids become. From a bone density point of view, as I said, just the mental cognition of getting their motor units, which in simply means, like, if you ever fell over and you struggle to get back up, there is a mechanism in our body that we can train and have adapted to that stress so we can bounce back up quickly. Think of any sport. There are going to be falls, but they spring back up quick. The ability to have force and power output is one of the best way, or the only way we can do that is training it with a bit of resistance, training it in a safe environment. Albeit sport has more of an impact in stunting our kids' growth than what resistance training does, yet we are constantly putting our kids into sport. And I do not, just because we know that that's a fact, I would not hold back in putting our kids in sport, because what happens in sport, what happens in resistance training is kids are starting to learn about their body, where their body is in time and space, where their left foot goes. And the amount of times I've trained a client that's played sports, and I can say certain coaching cues, they just have more awareness of their body and they can move and they can be adaptable. Because let's be honest, every single one of us will have low back problems or low back tightness or low back stiffness at one point or another, because the world that we live in just now, the way that it's designed and set up is for us to become weaker, more fragile, unhealthier, unfitter, and ultimately edge towards needing the use of all these other technological advancements, whether it's a wheelchair, whether it's a Zimmer, whether it's a medication, but we are so pushed to this other extreme, like WALL-E. If you've ever watched WALL-E, at the end of them, we're all in these wheelchairs and it's this augmented reality and we have no sort of we have no quality of life, should I say. I definitely encourage you, if you've got kids, get them involved with a bit of resistance training. Load management is absolutely key. There's no need to load anything heavy. Like, heavy doesn't mean you're going to build a stronger kid. To an extent, you want to progressively load that. Start with the technique, learning the skill, getting really good at the skill, and then starting to increase the weight because you know that you've got the technique nailed. Just like if you had to lift weights, the process is exactly the same. Now, with that being said, this coming Sunday and Sundays going forward, if you're local to Airdrie, I've been running a lifting club for the last couple of weeks and people have wanted to bring their kids along. Now, I've let friends and family do that, but I didn't want to have the responsibility of just everyone bringing their kids on, because the bigger those classes get, or the bigger the workshops get, or the club gets, the harder it is to manage that. So I'm going to launch a completely separate lifting club for parents and kids to work out together, and I'll create the environment so it's in a safe space that we're doing exercises that you can learn, but not also have the fear of injuring yourself with. Now, you can injure yourself with absolutely anything in life if it's done incorrectly, but that's why hopefully you trust me enough to take you through that. So if you want to be involved with that, there's going to be a little link in the description below. Click that out, fill that out. I'll give you the details. Not sure on the time yet, but if you keep an eye on my social media, I will keep you updated. So, does lifting weights stunt your growth? Absolutely not. There's nothing to fear against it. Make sure you're doing it with the right intensity and get a bit of resistance training in if you want to live a healthier and stronger life. Okay, myth number 2, fasted cardio. Is there any merit to it burning more fat than normal fed cardio? In short, no. It has no benefit whether you do your cardio at the start without eating anything or while you're fed. What matters most is the total amount of calories you've ate over the course of the day. Now, with that being said, there is something you need to dive a little bit deeper in. So like the previous myth, let's dive into where did this come from? And again, it came from the sort of bodybuilding world that in some cases, fasted cardio sort of made sense. If you have an empty stomach and you start doing your cardio, then you're going to tap into those fat stores that we have in our body and utilize that as the energy. So we go into the fat burning zone. But the fat burning zone lasts all day, all week, all month, as long as the amount of energy we put in our body, aka calories, and the amount of energy we require is more, then our body will utilize fat. So now that we know that, is there any point in doing fasted cardio at all? Why do people still do it if that information is out there? Well, there is a little bit of merit to fasted cardio. So let's say you are someone who is in a calorie deficit and you struggle with hunger. We all do. If you don't struggle with hunger, then you're one of those lucky people who can stick to your calorie deficit and get into your fat loss journey with ease. However, for 99.99999% of us, we have trouble with the response of hunger, and some of us can't deal with that as well as others. So this is where fasted cardio can come into play. You might be thinking, how on earth would doing fasted cardio lead to me being able to suppress that hunger appetite? Well, when you get up, you do whatever, brush your teeth, wake yourself up, splash some water on your face, you head down to the gym, you jump on the treadmill or whatever cardio it is that you're doing, your body goes into this sympathetic state. So 5-10 minutes in, you start moving. You may feel hungry, but that sympathetic state manages to suppress that as time goes on. You probably figured this out yourself. Like if you've ended up working out, there's some animals out there that will just eat in the middle of a workout, and 9 times out of 10, they absolutely don't need to be doing that. There's so many times where I'll be hungry and I start my workout and then I'm not hungry during the workout, and for about 30 to 60 minutes after my workout, I can get away with not eating food because that hunger response just isn't there. And that's what happens with fasted cardio. So why is that a good thing? Well, it means your window of the amount of calories that you're consuming is shortened. So it then means you can sort of delay the amount of, or enhance the amount of food you've had in a smaller window. So let's say you sleep 8 hours a night, so you have 16 hours to consume 20,000 20,000 calories, that'd be nice. 2,500 calories. And in this example, over those 16 hours, like you probably find that you eat your 2,500 calories and you still get another 6 hours at the end of the day where you need to muscle down and get into that determination mode to stick to your food. Well, the fasted cardio sort of extends that period by a couple hours. So then you get to condense that window of the amount of food that you need to have in 2,500 calories over 14 hours in this example, maybe 13 hours, depending on how long it takes you to get up, get going, get down to the gym, so on and so forth. Speaking from personal experience and working with clients, I'd say that that's a good strategy to do for maybe 10 to 20% of you guys, if I'm being honest, because what you might find is that once you do your fasted cardio, because of the energy expenditure that you've used within that session, it makes the rest of your day harder. So you then don't move as much. You find that you can't hit your step goal. You have no energy to show up to work or do the other session, your gym session throughout that day. And it has a negative impact, which means, which in theory would mean that you move less and you don't end up burning as many calories as what you would have had if you just had breakfast and went to the gym to do your cardio. You get what I mean? So for most of us, that's going to be better for us to follow. But interestingly enough, what you'll find that there is a good majority of people who skip breakfast, and what they find is that they use less energy throughout the day. And this is backed up by scientific literature as well. I'm not going to bore you with the stats, but again, there's been multiple sort of research done on this where there's multiple groups of individuals. Some do it fed, some do it fasted, some just skip breakfast straight up. And every single group who moved into the skipping breakfast part, I think it was like 70 to 80% of them found that they had less energy, or they reported less energy to do the activities that they had to do throughout the day. So fasted, non-fasted, it's really up to you. Play about with it, try it out, see what works best for you. But inherently, or ultimately at the end of the day, it doesn't matter as long as you meet the total amount of calories that you have. And the only other thing I would say in this is if, let's say you're struggling to hit your step goal, you've got 13,000 steps to hit and you're only hitting 12,000, then see the fasted cardio, what does it do as a byproduct? Well, you need to set that alarm half an hour earlier. You need to set the alarm an hour earlier. So you're up that hour early. You feel a bit more productive and accomplished because you've done something for you at the start of the day. So you can have this sort of positive gain throughout the day, but it really depends on your lifestyle. It might be the right thing for you to do. It might not. So does fasted cardio burn more calories than fed cardio? No, that is also a myth. Okay, on to the last one, which is the fruitiest one out of them all, because I got caught up in this when I was a young kid. The buzzword when I was growing up and I was working out and following all these YouTubers and guys in the muscle building space, post-workout anabolic window was sold to us hard. Now, there's two reasons why this was such a big push. One, it was sort of bro science, and it came off the back of, one, we didn't have a lot of scientific literature to support when does our body build muscle, but we sort of knew that these scientific terms existed. When we cause damage to a muscle, protein synthesis, or because of the muscle that we've done to our damage, then it would make sense to refuel our body with the amount of protein to kick off protein synthesis, if I can get that word out, which is going to inherently build the particles within our body where we've broken down that muscle and gain size from it, right? In theory, again, it sort of makes sense, but does that mean it's true? No. In the 90s or the 80s and 90s, when sort of bodybuilding was becoming more popular, bodybuilding.com had then kicked off. Social media wasn't where it was. We didn't have a ton of spend as an industry because we're still fairly new on doing scientific research on what's right and what's wrong. So the whole bro science world started to come out with, you know what, let's just make sure that we're getting that meal in as soon as we can. And that's where this quote-unquote anabolic window came from. To build muscle, you had to have a good amount of fast-acting carbs and a good amount of protein 30 to 60 minutes after you finish the workout. However, fast forward to 2024, and again, this one has been debunked. Now, there is an argument to be said that once you've done a strenuous, hard workout, absolutely makes sense to get a meal in as quick as you can. But the phrase anabolic window implies that there is a closing time. And what you find is that For anyone that does a resistance training workout, that window of opportunity where you're more sensitive to that protein synthesis to absorb the nutrients and get your body working on building muscle and utilizing it as energy and getting rid of fat and all that sort of stuff, that can last up to 48 hours after a workout, which is fascinating. Now, of course, it spikes and then it starts to drip off as time goes on. And again, it probably just highlights the beauty of weight training, that if we're not consistently weight training, the importance of when we get our meals in doesn't necessarily matter. And multiple studies have managed to debunk this over a number of years now, where the total amount of protein consumed on a daily basis becomes the most important factor. However, that being said, there is times where we want to get a meal in post-workout as best we can. But if we get a good pre-workout meal in as well, then that still carries over. So you're I think it becomes splitting hairs almost. The only time where this becomes more valid is for anyone doing double day training, particularly the whole hybrid movement. People are running in the morning, lifting weights at night, or running and then lifting weights. We need to fuel our body for that, because there's only so much storage of energy that our body can utilize at one time. And it absolutely makes sense that as soon as you finish one workout, refeeding, refueling right after that workout is one of the best things you can do to let it digest, repair the damage that you potentially have caused, and refuel you for your next session. So to conclude, is the post-workout anabolic window a thing? Not as much as we've been led to believe. You do not need to consume protein 30 to 60 minutes straight after workout unless you're doing double day training. What matters most is that we consume the right amount of protein for our body over the day. Now, the amount of protein depends on the person, but roughly speaking, it's good to aim for 2 grams of protein per kilo of mass, or ideal mass that you want to be. So that's the first attempt at debunking myths, or Fitness Mythbuster Mondays. We'll see how long we go with this. I'll do another one of these in a couple of weeks, but what else is on your mind when it comes to fitness? What questions do you have? Let's dive into them together and let's find out if there is any merit to them or it is a myth that needs to be busted. So thank you for tuning into today's episodes. You know what to do. If you got any value whatsoever and you want to support me and this little podcast that I've got going on, then consider leaving a 5-star rating on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or subscribe on YouTube. You can leave a comment below if you're watching on Spotify, listening on Spotify, and you can also comment if you're watching on YouTube. So with that being said, enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you on the next one.